The other day I was checking the Steam discount page when I found a 50% off video game that released just a few months ago. The game had bad reviews and I thought that it was a shitty game, so I bought it. Why would I buy a video game with all the possible red flags, you may ask? Well, it's easy. I love bad games. Not shabby games or obvious scams, talking about the game that you just know that the developer spent months doing, but it has things like art styles that don't match, difficulty jumps that don't make sense, a main mechanic that only the developer knows how it works. The thing is that the game presented itself as a kind of open world Zelda, exciting combat and exploration in a world full of secrets, the typical, the usual. And once I started to play it, it seemed well enough. Explore a bit, fight with a critter. Suddenly, with my resources, and I have to build a city, to solve puzzles, and I didn't want all that. I wanted to fight monsters and to explore the world without needing to craft stairs. I didn't care, and because of the developer adding 20 very unnecessary things, the interesting parts and the reason why I played the game in the first place matter less. Isn't Breath of the Wild doing the same things? So why one of the two video games, one Game of the Year and the other one is a 50% discount on the second month of releasing? The answer, believe it or not, is that while both games are equally horizontal, Breath of the Wild is more vertical. What does this vertical and horizontal thing mean? Actually, I just made it up. Maybe someone has already used it in some sort of way, but I have my own definition and I will explain it to you in this video. On one side, you got the vertical games. Those are the games that focus mainly on a core mechanic that could be as simple as something like jumping. In a game that's completely vertical, the challenge will be based on the jumping and how it interacts with the world. It's the way you defeat enemies, overcome obstacles, unlock power-ups, and even things like ending the game. You could visualize this as a very tall building where, in spite of being a thin structure, it stretches very tall. Obviously, this kind of video game requires a lot of creativity from the part of the developers because of these limitations that are being imposed for following this design philosophy. Maybe what I said before sounded normal, and to you it probably sounds very obvious, all this killing enemies by jumping on them. But until Mario popularized it, in the grand majority of video games, if you jumped on an enemy, the most possible outcome would have been take some damage. The same thing also happens with things like banging your skull on some concrete to get a power-up. A disadvantage that you could see in this kind of video games is the variety. Don't be confused. Yes, limitations are one of the best tools you can use if you want to see something that pops out and looks original. But at the end of the day, there's still limitations. You have the risk of being too monotone and boring, or not finding the niche. This is the reason why the grand majority of vertical video games sometimes kinda cheat and decide to add one or two smaller mechanics that complement the main one. To use Mario again as an example, in Mario games this tends to be the classical power-ups like the Fire Flower or the Superstar. Still a very superficial mechanic, but still in future games it can be expanded upon to explore different alternatives of gameplay, and it can even relate again with the main mechanic, which is jumping. After that, we have horizontal games. The thing with this type of games is that while they do have a defined theme like exploration or adventure or whatever else, this game also tends to have a great diversity of game features. To continue with the motif of Nintendo games, let's talk about Breath of the Wild, the perfect contrast and example for what I want to explain in this video. You could say that the main thing of Breath of the Wild is exploration, and you'd be right, a theme and not a mechanic. The main mechanic is the thing that makes horizontal games special is the way all gameplay elements are leveled. There is the same amount of variety and deepness in all of them. so not any of them are actually more important than the others. Every single one works with one another to make the game much more than just the sum of all its parts. Before, we were talking about needing creativity for vertical games, but horizontal games require something that is harder to achieve. That is usually the real problem, right? Max wants to make a non-linear MMORPG in where you write your own story, but Max also believes that it is entirely possible to make a video game with just ifs and fors. At the end of the day, this type of video games, for some reason or another, tend to have a very stretched out development cycles and hundreds of workers on it, not to even mention all the money needed to even maintain this type of project. That's why Max's game doesn't matter how many years he spends on it. Him alone is probably going to end up making a horizontal game that is too overwhelming with all the things that you need to learn to play the game, or is going to be very strange when the game has an ability tree with hundreds of possible builds, but then a crafting system with just 2 possible constructions. So then, what if you wanted to apply this knowledge? You'll probably be able to understand the pattern. If you've watched this video, you would probably be able to understand the pattern. If you are working with a small team or solo, the best thing you can do is to make the game as vertical as possible. I actually think that making a horizontal video game is a bad way of actually learning game development, because at the end of the day, if you don't know what you're doing, you're probably just going to end up making a very bad mix of different games stapled together. Of course, not all games are either vertical or horizontal. Instead of always being a binary solution, it tends to be more of a diffuminated and confusing spectrum between types of game design philosophies. Actually, the games that blend only 2 or 3 main genres can turn out to be also very unique and with a lot of personality. For example, in Hades, the blend of a more traditional roguelike with a unique way of making a visual novel, making the progress of one actually depending on the other, and some way not making it seem like 2 separate games taped together. So there are a lot of video games that fall into this intermediate state. For the average creator, it's only useful to know the general direction that your game is going to follow. It is also very useful to help you narrow down how complicated your game might end up being. This way, you can save up a lot of time implementing things into the game that you for sure know that you will keep. I, myself, for the video game I'm making, Forever Donut, wishlist down below, I decided to create a game that's as vertical as possible. The core gameplay objective of my video game basically boils down to the balancing of 3 main resources: dough, donuts and money. The resources scale depending with one another and also in a non-symmetrical way. That means that scaling production is not as easy as upgrade one-time dough and then upgrade one-time donuts, but more or less about using the complementary elements of the game that are made to leave the player always guessing about how to keep it all as balanced as possible. Passive ability to produce more of X thing. This topping has a passive ability of producing more of X thing, but now you have to worry about your other underperforming resource. For example, in Forever Donut, boost of production are at the same time a way of giving the player a balancing agent when things are very uneven, but also a chaos element for runs that are too balanced. I make this with a limited resource that if you don't use, you are just wasting it. So it forces the player to either have it be a tool to try to steer up your balancing production, or to force player to a discomfort and a unbalance when things are going too good for them. And that is a complementary game feature made so my video game can gain verticality without needing to add a whole new system that has nothing to do with the original objective of the game. There's still too much room for discussion. Give me your opinion on video game verticality on the comment section, and go to the Steam page of my video game and add it to your wishlist if you found it interesting. And as always, thanks for your attention, and I'll see you soon.